Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's Sector Spotlight, focusing on government. I'm thrilled to be here to introduce you to three fantastic alumni and a current participant as they share their experience in the Ivey Executive MBA. My name's Kim Randall, and I work as the Associate Director of Admissions and Recruitment for the program. So if this is something you're keen to learn more about or to discuss the application do's and don'ts, I will be your key contact and look forward to supporting you through the admission process. Part of my job is to ensure that great people know about the program. And I think that one of the best ways to do that is to introduce you to fantastic alumni and participants who are living and breathing the experience and can share their firsthand account of the Ivey Executive MBA. So without further ado, I'm going to first deliver a land acknowledgement and then hand it over to our wonderful panelists to share introductions about who's going to be speaking and where they're coming from and what experiences they brought to the program and are bringing to this discussion. So to start, I'd like to acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehouk, and Chinookan nations on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 with the District 1's Covenant Wampum. With this, I respect the longstanding relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land, as they are the original caretakers. We acknowledge historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous people endure in Canada, and we accept responsibility as a public institution to contribute towards revealing and correcting miseducation, as well as renewing respectful relationships with Indigenous communities through our teaching, research, and community service. As we are a few days on the heels of National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, I have been part of a lot of really impactful, meaningful conversations at Ivey and the larger Western community, talking about continued steps towards reconciliation and what it looks like at a public institution. And I'm pleased to share the circulation of resources and podcasts and real opportunities to engage with Indigenous peoples and communities, ways of teaching, and the continued work that Ivey is doing in this space. And I'm particularly interested, I'm actually based in Toronto, but I'm very interested to go to London early November when our new Indigenous learning space will be opening. It's something that you may have seen on LinkedIn or on our website, but it is truly a space that will bring community together, both Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples, to celebrate the rich culture, ways of teaching and learning, and to celebrate the rich culture that Indigenous peoples bring to campus, to the community, and beyond. So thank you. And with that, I would like to hand it over. Matthew, perhaps we can start with you, if you wouldn't mind. I'd love to hear from each of you who you are, what you do, and when you were in the program, or in your case, Shiv, the current status in the program. So Matthew, I'll hand it over to you to start.
Great. Thanks, Kim. And I guess good morning out west and good afternoon out east. I'm located out of Edmonton. I work in the government of Alberta, currently as the Assistant Deputy Minister of System Excellence at Alberta Education, and have been doing that now it'll be 6 months in about a week. So my first senior executive level role in the Alberta Public Service, I worked in a variety of executive director roles prior to being an ADM over about 5 years, 2017 till this past spring, in a number of portfolios: health, transportation, Indigenous relations, across a variety of fields. So I was responsible for a major capital project at one point that was obtaining environmental approvals. I've done policy development, intergovernmental relations, so fairly diverse experience as an executive director. And then for the period before that, I was Chief of Staff to Deputy Minister of Health for 4 years. And before that, I was on the political side. I was political staff for about 8 years. So we're now into, I think, almost year 18 of my public service career. So that's career side. And then as far as the EMBA was concerned, I graduated or ended the program in January of 2017. So it's not quite 6 years since I finished. So.
Thank you. Thanks for the great introduction and overview of your career, and also for staying connected to Ivey 6 years post-program. Paul, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kim. My name is Paul Samra. I work for the province of Manitoba here out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Just completed the EMBA program a few months back, and my graduation's in a couple of weeks. So some different perspectives, I think, across the panel here. I've done work in my government career. I've done work outside of government as well, in consulting and nutraceuticals, but focusing on the government space. I've done work in the early childhood and foster care programs. I've worked from disability issues for both youth and for adults in Manitoba housing, and also social innovation, and currently in the executive team out of Manitoba Justice, particularly in the family law space. And something that I'm proud of is that Clare's Law legislation just came into effect this year out of Manitoba, and that was from our office to help victims of intimate partner violence. And many of the things that I learned from the EMBA program I believe, supported and led to that. So that's a quick overview of what I'm about.
Thank you. And hopefully we can unpack a bit about the impact of the program and your work as we continue the conversation. Okay, last but not least, I'll hand it over to you.
Hey everyone, it's Shiv from Toronto. I'm currently in my third and final semester of the EMBA program. I'm a political staffer on the political side. I'm the executive director of operations for Premier Ford. I have a different route of getting into politics. I didn't do a poli-sci or anything like that. I wasn't smart enough probably to get into those. So I went the different route and ended up as a technology guy with Stephen Harper. Did all 5 of his elections on the tour side, and ended up as a PMO staffer for a number of years, for the last 5 years, and then went to opposition, a little bit of the NHL for about a year or so, and then went into opposition and then helped Premier Ford get elected in 2018, and then just got through the last campaign, which was pretty stressful given that we were in the second semester. As you guys can appreciate, the deliverables really add up on you. And now into the third and final, mostly on the operations side, although my hands touch into a lot of different areas, but mostly just streamlining operations and ensuring the government has smoother processes in delivering its message as well as its policy to the public. And we'll see what happens afterwards. But right now, I'm enjoying every moment of the EMBA experience, although I want to pull my hair out, but that is long gone. So I can't do it.
Thank you for your introduction, and sincere thanks to each of you for being part of this this discussion. Clearly, you have very, very full plates professionally, and I'm sure personally as well. But my goodness, like the important work that you do, and I'm sure being pulled in a million different directions. Shiv, like you're a perfect example of how efficient you need to become in the executive MBA, because you're joining us from your really, that efficiency is evident and impressive. I'm so excited to kind of dive a little bit deeper with each of you. Okay, so as a starting point, I'm interested to know, given the impressive careers you've led, and clearly you've all did a great job, I think, explaining kind of the road to your current roles. How did you decide, and especially being at different junctures? So Matthew, 6 years out, Paul, just about to confer later this month, right? It's later. It's like in like a week and a half or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And Shiv, you're in the home stretch of the program. How did you decide it was the right time for you to pursue the executive MBA? And I'm also interested to know why Ivey. There's great options. Matthew and Paul, you're from out of province. There's options across the country. How did the three of you decide that it was the right time for the EMBA, and also that Ivey was the right school for you? Paul, can we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something I was always interested in, even though it didn't float to the surface of my conscious until a little bit later in my life and career. And I've always done things on my own timing, which is a joke in the family. I hope it's a joke. It's a joke we acknowledge kindly, is what I would say. My dad was a manager of a large business corporation when I was younger, and I would go tinker around, and it was endlessly fascinating to me that, placing products in certain areas of the stores at different times of years. And he used to always get me to help him with block facing, which I don't know how much experience everyone has, but in retail, it's when products are pulled forward to similar levels and labels facing forward. In any case, he would say that this has a distinct impact on the behavior of consumers and on sales. So that was always something that stuck with me, and it took me a long time in life to discover that there's actually a science to business as well. Came into government, never thought about my career goals as related to education and pursuing the MBA until very recently, I think about 5 years back. And it just kept coming to my mind, where not only for diverse options for career, but then the idea that we're talking about innovation and transformation in government all the time, it made sense to me to want to explore other sectors as well, to see what that cross jurisdictional, cross sectoral, cross, between non-profit and community, what lessons we could learn that could be brought into government as well. I drove my family and my wife nuts for about 5 years until she threatened me and said that either I need to pursue it or stop talking about it. So that really was the impetus to make a decision. And I think that what I could share is that in my experience, the extensive planning didn't provide a lot of value in my life in retrospect. I just had to jump in. I don't think there's a right time. I think the concept of a right time doesn't exist for me. And it's always down to when you really want something and the sacrifices you're willing to make during the process of getting it. And the right time is when you kind of decide to make it right. So it happened to be the right time. Scanning, I'm a big believer in being honest with yourself and scanning for your own purpose and values. And there was a connection to Mary Crossan, who's a prominent professor at Ivey. I had her book, Developing Leadership Character, on my bookshelf for years. So the work that she had done on character development coincided with work that I was familiar with outside of school in my personal life. So that was something that stuck out for me. And when I wrote my essay for Ivey, for the application, that was something that featured prominently. The effect that book and Good Leaders Learn, which also is a book that came out of Ivey, it had quite an impact on me about the roles of character, competence, commitment to good leadership. So that was something that was quite important to me. I aligned quite a bit with the purpose and mission. And I know for a lot of us, we tend to roll our eyes at websites and organizations that declare their purpose and mission. But that's something that's important to me. And I very much related to Ivey's purpose of developing and inspiring leaders for a sustainable, prosperous world, and how we can develop leaders who think globally and act strategically in that way. So very, very long run answer. And if I had more time, I would go on and on, but that's my story.
I'm so happy to hear that, and that the mission and that really resonates with you. And I think especially hearing like the role that you play in kind of in government and guiding policy and making decisions that impact Canadians. Like I think that resonates with you, like bettering the world. That's obviously a good thing. So thank you. Shiv, I saw you nodding curiously when you said there's no right time, just jump in. How did you decide it was the right time?
No, Paul nailed it. No, Paul nailed it. I don't know if there is a right time. I think all of us who decided to do this as professionals can agree that, the right time is when you do it, when you decide to do it, essentially. For me, it was, I had been inspired by some people I'd gone through the program years before that I worked with, and they always spoke highly about the program. That's one. Number two, the case-based method was really something that I needed to dive into. And I had some knowledge of it prior when I was at PMO, because one of my colleagues went through it, and he knew that I was not somebody that needed to learn formulas as in 1 + 1 = 2. He's like, you come at things differently and you should consider this case-based stuff. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. This all sounds made up to me. Anyway, so I read into it a little bit, but that was years ago. And the time came, it was COVID. I've always wanted to do something business related after politics was done. Because I really, I think as everybody can agree, I really enjoy streamlining things and finding efficiencies and improving the process and really making the machinery go smooth. And during COVID, I had done some, let's just say some of those online programs through Udemy or through Khan Academy. And I thought to myself, maybe I can actually do this. And so I reached out to some people that were in my network that have gone through Ivey, which actually I would say close to almost a dozen people. And they all said the exact same thing. Number one, you're built for it. But number two, you should give it a shot and don't be so intimidated. Like, you can actually do this if you think you can, if you think you got a shot. And what I realized was, especially in the political world, the ability to solve problems and diagnose problems is a skill set that comes to you, but you don't understand how to really refine it until you actually have to like think about it and put it on paper. And then what I've learned through Ivey is actually like how to professionalize it and how to streamline it, even just my own thinking, which is, you know, I think changed my approach vastly. So to Paul's point, that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I don't think there's a right time to just do it. I think you just start it and then you learn how to fit it into your life.
I love that. I heard someone once say, if it's important to you, the universe will make space. And I think what you both share, it sounds like that has rung true, and you make the space for it. Matthew, what about you? How did you come to the program, decide it was the right time, and why Ivey?
So it's similar threads. You know, in my case, it was more of a fork in the road. So when I first started thinking about Ivey and about doing MBA, I was about 2 years into being chief of staff at deputy's office. I had done similar type of work almost for a decade at that point, and the deputy at the time sort of called me out and said, well, you could do other things in your career, but work for a deputy, work for a minister. Having been called out by a deputy to think about the future, you know, I took it quite seriously. And you know, really, since I finished my undergrad, I wanted to do something else, but not dissimilar to Paul. It just never was. Just, you know, there was something at work. You know, there were elections, there were budgets, there were projects. Things would explode and need attention, and you just kind of go, that's a next year problem. And it was a next year problem for 10 years until that fork got presented to me. You know, ultimately settled on doing MBA. So when I went back to my deputy, I said, look, I want to do an MBA. Thought about law, thought about some other things, but MBA sort of settled on that because it was a good general education. And she said, great, now think about Ivey. And at that point, I knew about Ivey. You know, it ranked highly, it had high profile, and you know, she had a number of her colleagues, friends that had done the EMBA, and you know, these were people that I'd worked with while I was at Health, and you know, they spoke highly of it. You know, well regarded, highly beneficial education. So you know, not unlike Shiv, you know, when I was looking at going back to school, you know, at that point, I didn't really want to go back to school, right? I didn't want to go and just, you know, I didn't want to sit through lectures. You know, I didn't want to learn formulas. I'd sort of reached a point in my life where that would not be a great investment in time. So the fact that Ivey had the case-based method, the ability to dig in, the ability to be exposed to different ways of thinking, you know, different scenarios ranked very highly in my thinking. The team-based approach to learning also ranked very highly. That had a very strong appeal as a contrast to just, you know, doing something that was more not course-based, more, you know, lecture-based, classroom-based. And then last but not least, for me coming out of Alberta, you know, certainly very strong universities, very strong MBA programs, but this was one opportunity to branch out, right? If you work in the public service, you know, one of the features is it tends to be a lifelong thing. If you aspire to working in the public sector, may move around, may try some different things, but it tends to be a bit of a lifetime vocation. So for me, the opportunity to go to Toronto and London to do the MBA also ranked very highly. Different people, different networks, different way of thinking, and ultimately it just all gelled for me, and that's why Ivey was the pick at the end of the day.
I'm happy to hear that, and I think one of the things I have to imagine, one of the schedule and the 4 days a month in person is makes it a little more doable, not just for everyone, but especially folks out of province who are flying in. And one thing I'll add for anyone who watches this and is interested from out of province, one thing I'll note is that there is sorry, I'm just going to okay, we'll set that up in a second. There is an accommodation and travel bursary to help offset the travel cost to and from Toronto. And so I think that one of the things that's really emphasized and valued within the Ivey classroom is the diversity of industries that are represented, and also geographic diversity. So having experts from the prairies, from Western Canada, I think that it just makes everything, the discussion stronger, and the experience so much richer. And so we would never want travel to be a deterrent. And so that's in place to hopefully eliminate any concern about traveling to and from. Next, I'd love to shift gears and talk a little bit about how you made it happen. Life is busy. Your jobs are very demanding, I'm sure. And there's a lot to juggle. So can you talk to me a little bit about how you made it happen? You being in Toronto once a month, but also the 25 hours on average a week of schoolwork. Curious to hear if you have any tips and tricks or any strategies that have proven really effective and that worked for you. Paul, you're unmuted, so why don't we start with you?
I'm just keeping myself there to reduce the
I love
number
it.
of clicks on screens here. How did I make it happen? Very poorly, failed miserably, blocked off calendars constantly, failed to meet them every time, managed conflict, not at all, set lots of expectations, fell short consistently, was a ball of anxiety, traveling in and out. And despite that, I look back and say, it was amazing. It was worth it. I feel more confident. I feel capable. I feel like there's depth and breadth to it. So I don't want to say this will be easy. I don't want to say this will be, if you do follow this procedure from A to Z, that you'll be able to make it happen. But you'll learn a lot about yourself in that process. And I think that mimics our work life on a daily basis. There will be crises. There will be, conflicts in scheduling, that you will have to constantly do an analysis of, okay, this was my goal, but this is the reality that needs to be confronted at this moment. And you'll realize that you have the capacity and you have the skill set and the tools to deal with it, and you will fail. And failure won't change your opinion of yourself, because you have no choice but to pick up and just move forward. That's the best thing I can say. If I look back and you were to break down technically, how did I make it happen? Miserably. I'm shocked and amazed that I'm still married. So my biggest tip here is keep your partners happy, keep your family members happy, treat them well if you have any sort of time, because working full time and doing your EMBA this is being recorded, let's choose my words, is insane. And it is incredibly, incredibly valuable. And the amount of stretch that I've discovered, I know this is so cliche, but trust me, it is remarkable. The process was invaluable. I wouldn't change a thing about it.
Thanks for sharing that, and I'm happy that you're still married. Matthew, what about you? How did you make it work amongst the competing priorities personally and professionally?
Like Paul, it's a struggle, but it's a good struggle, and I would agree that going through the experience shaped me and how I functioned and behaved as a leader. So as tough as it is, there's really big benefits. The home front is important. So my partner had to adjust. It's a journey. So she also works in public sector, so she understood the work I was doing. So that part was checked. But I had to be really upfront going into this, that there were the trips to Toronto every month. It was almost like another part-time job added on to the demands of a full-time job. So there were times where I just wouldn't be around or available. So building in that time, so we had our time on Saturdays to reconnect and to hang out. So that up front is a reality, not a bad reality, but it's something you need to factor in. At the time, I stayed as chief of staff to the deputy minister of health for the entirety of the program. So that, as far as departments go, was one of the more demanding departments, one of the more critical deputy minister roles or deputy minister's offices in government. So I had to reprogram how I worked. So I to add the 25 hours a week plus of catch up and teamwork and projects and reading and everything. The fact I'd be gone, and traveling, it was more like a 5-day, almost 5.5-day cycle every month. I had to be very deliberate about what I was going to be involved in and what I wasn't going to be involved in, which had the added benefit of I became really, really good at delegation. Not at first, but by the end of the 18 months, you become really good at delegation. You become really good at priority setting, which are not bad skills to learn. Because I had to travel cross country, I had to build boundaries around the Toronto or the London weeks. So wasn't available, had to trust, my number two who was covering and acting for me. So I had to simultaneously protect my time and also learn when not to poke in, right? Which again is hard for people, especially if you're already in a leadership role or an executive role. Learning when not to poke in is also really critical. And I'll be honest, it was a struggle. Part of the Type A Club, so the urge to not look at emails, the urge not to poke in, the urge not to call walking back to the Intercontinental Hotel at the end of the day. So that was all really good practice. I had to be honest with my deputy at the time, and whoever you have as your leader about Wednesday to Sunday I'm not, and I'm not around. And I'll, there are chunks of the day where if I'm in class, you can't walk out and take a call, So had to plan things in advance. So what we got in the habit of doing is, because I had usually 3 or 4 hours hanging out at Pearson Airport Sunday night, Deputy and I would have a call. So that's when I'd reconnect. That's when I'd find out what happened. You'd get the brain dump, and then you'd have a whole plane ride home to think about it. But again, so from a expectation standpoint, very important to be upfront, good practice. But I'd say just from personal management, it was probably, it was such a great experience because you were forced to confront your time management. You were forced to prioritize, which so rarely happens. You just get in the role and you go. So having that experience is something that, I still struggle with it. We're all human, but it's etched in my mind now in a way that probably wouldn't have been possible had I not had the experience. The last thing I'd say, especially for those of you that are thinking of doing this, whether you're in Toronto or around Toronto, but definitely those who are traveling, don't cut yourself short on the travel. Get there the day before, get a good meal in, get a good night's sleep. There are others that are also traveling. So, usually we would try to reconnect the Wednesday night before the 4 days started. But I did the red eye a couple of times and it was terrible. So I was told not to do the red eye, and the first few times I said, "Oh, I can do the red eye. I can make this work." And you show up at about 5 a.m. in Toronto, and you've not slept well because who can really sleep on a plane. You've not eaten well, and you're just discombobulated. So I would not. Don't be a hero if you can get away with it. Try to take the time to not because it's important. You're live for 4 days. They are intense days. Like the nature of the program is you have to be on. So if you show up tired, kind of discombobulated after a rough flight in the middle of the night, you're not there. So you're blowing the experience if you're cutting yourself short. So.
Thanks for that advice. To kind of give yourself that extra time. It is full speed ahead at 8:30 a.m. when the class starts. Shiv, you're still living it right now as a term 3. How are you making it work?
I love the fact that both Paul and Matthew admitted to their, I guess you could say, deficiencies, like your errors, but they're not errors in the sense that like you failed something. You just learned something more about yourself. I went through an election campaign where I run the tour, like the road, and it took about a year and a half to get ready for it. But then execution was about 45 days, and it's literally every single day from about 4 o'clock in the morning until about midnight or so. And I took 2 days off because we had a couple of the quizzes or big projects that were due. And I made the error, Matthew, of jumping outside and making phone calls and taking them during those 2 days that I was only off for school. And look, you guys are right. You are going to stumble, you're going to fail, but you're going to learn a lot more about yourself. And what is happening is your resistance and your bandwidth. You start to understand your own, which I think is the most critical piece. So I think if anything, this is a process that, yeah, the educational side is it's you can't you can't quantify the value of it. But I actually find that the piece that I reflect most on is what I'm capable of and what my boundaries are and how to manage within those boundaries, and knowing what my tolerance level is for chaos or whatever it may be that I'm dealing with. The other things that I would add is, so I'm single going through the program. I was before, I probably am going to be afterwards, so that's fine. But for dealing with this chaos, because on the political side, it's up and down constantly. I find that I'm a creature of habit, so I need routine. So I find that as long as I stay disciplined to my schedule and I fit this in, it helps. Now, I don't have a full family to take care of, so I don't know how strenuous that could be. So I can't speak for those folks, but anybody else, I would say that for me, it has been, up at a certain time, you do some of your own personal stuff, you hit the gym, whatever the case may be, work, and then slot it in where you need to. But keeping that regimen has been critical for me. And I found that was part of what got me through term 1. And then I set into a bit of a groove for term 2. And in term 3, it's become muscle memory for me, which I think has been critical. And then the last thing I would say is, I think it was to Matthew's point, you really understand what your priorities in life are when you only realize you only have this much time available for X. And so you really start to understand where you're going to put your weight and what you're going to prioritize, and you let go of the things that might be frivolous or might just not need the attention that it needed before. So again, you learn a lot about yourself, and that's something I can't put a price on.
Thanks for sharing that. It's interesting. It's so great to hear each of your responses to that question, and how you talked about how it's personally impacted you. Because I have conversations all the time with individuals who are researching the program and considering, like, is this the right fit for me? And a lot of times, understandably, the focus is on how is this going to accelerate my career? How am I going to make more money? How am I going to move into more senior leadership roles? But over and over, I hear from alumni that really, of course, there's a strong professional component. You're going to become more efficient and a more strategic and a better leader. But the personal change, which then has a ripple effect across the board, is like immeasurable. And so I feel validated hearing what each of you shared about how you've been challenged and changed through the experience. Now, you each touched on this a bit, but I'm curious, do you have anything else to add about the impact? Like, not only you talked a bit about how it impacted you personally, but I'd love to know what's been the impact on your on your career and on your outlook, looking outward from the program. What would you say to that? Matthew, maybe you can start.
Yeah, sure. So just to sort of build on what we've been talking about around the program itself. So I'd say the biggest thing about the program is it's a bit of a mirror of yourself. You learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot of things you didn't know before, both internally and the content that gets presented through the program. And that all leads to formation, right? Pressure forms, right? And good pressure forms better people. So I'd say for myself, the program was a confidence booster, right? I'd worked in environments, I felt pretty confident, but to that point, hadn't really had to lead big team, lead big resources, lead big files. So knowing that that's where I was going, the program gave me a confidence boost. You recognize other people who have similar challenges as you, different industries, maybe different sectors, different avenues of life, but everyone is sort of going through similar struggles, similar challenges, and all that, you learn from it. And sometimes you go, oh, geez, like, so-and-so in class has managed to do all this, but then you kind of reflect and go, well, that person had confidence issues. That person didn't know what they were doing before they did this, and that. So being able to build confidence was huge. The other thing that I had this preconceived notion about, having worked in government for so long to that point, was you sort of imagine that government internally, it has its own unique problems, and that it can't really take in, give out. But when I think about it, it's amazing how you think about stuff you learned in the program, even to now. But the exposure you get, whether it's finance, accounting, leadership, strategy, marketing, they're all things you can pull into the work inside government, inside of agencies. And even as I was going through the program, there'd be things that would come up at work where we had talked about it in a previous session, in a previous course, and you'd go, wait a minute, we could actually, it was an analytics issue. We had a data issue. We were being pushed so hard. I can't remember what the exact issue was, but some group wanted us to move money for some reason, and it had come up as a decision, and it was sort of just check the box. Cranky stakeholder, and I'm exaggerating. Cranky stakeholder, give money, problem solved. And I think I'd put my hand up in the meeting and said, well, sure. Where's the data? And I think we had I think it was an analytics heavy weekend. And I said, sure. Like I was a bit chippy, and I said, show me the data. And they hadn't thought of the data. And so I had asked them, well, okay, show me the data. And sure enough, the data actually showed that whatever needed was met. There was no need to fund. And so we had sort of paused that decision, right? So it's a small example, but there's money, there's budget issues I have today that I think back on finance. There's leadership challenges I have today that I think back on leadership conversations. There's just stuff about myself and how I lead that I'll talk about with people in the MBA to this day. We'll talk about it. We'll chat about it, right? So all those things sort of, I think they talk about the toolbox, but at the end of the day, you go in, you come out with a toolbox. I went in, I came out with a toolbox, and like I said, it'll amaze me, and I'm sure it'll amaze those of you that have been through the program, where you're going to sit there one day and going, "Oh, we talked about that in a finance class." Right? Like, and especially because a lot of us we deal with major stakeholders in the private sector. We're called to make economic assessments and to give interpretations of the general picture of the economy. If you're an ADM or an ED, you're leading big people, broad, diverse groups of people. One of the biggest leadership lessons was, and I remember it was early in the program, where you're sort of called on the spot to say, you've got a dysfunctional employee, how would you manage them as a leader, right? And I remember the class discussion crystal clear in my head to this day, right? And anytime I have a problem, I think of that discussion. So for all those reasons, that's why that's why I there's lots of reasons why I'm in the role I'm in today, but I'm fairly certain the underpinning was the EMBA. I haven't told that. Like a lot of my deputy minister now says, like, I knew you before and after you did your MBA, and you were a different person in the years after, right? So it means something. It's not nothing.
Thank you. Paul, what about you? What's been the impact of the program on your career, on your outlook?
I think a lot of people probably want to hear that you finished the program, and then the sexiest companies in the world will come knocking at your door and offer you high middle figure, six-figure, middle figure, high, however you say it, salaries, and that hasn't happened. And I'm not sure that that's what government leaders are looking for. And I think when you say the impact it's had on your career, for me, it was always going to be the impact it's had on me. And if I'm bringing myself to a certain space, the people who need to notice will notice. Then it definitely broadens your own potential, but then your options, whether it's in government, outside of government. The largest impact it's had on me and my outlook on life is, and I mentioned this before, is courage. I think I realized that courage tends to be when you're confronted with situations, you have to confront the way you feel a certain way about yourself. I don't know enough about this. What if I fail? I need to perform this certain way. What ... It's endless. And I think that courage I've noticed immensely in myself, and I no longer fear those sort of stretch opportunities where there is a lot of ambiguity. And I think that really models the case-based learning method, which I think is the entire intent, although no one tells you as obviously at the beginning. So agility in thinking and agility in the way you perceive yourself when you're confronted with failure, when you're confronted with ambiguity, and knowing that asking for help and that you need others' help. Based on what Matthew said earlier, learning teams really did help me cement that in my brain. Other impacts, knowing that not everyone's going to see that the MBA you bring and what school you bring it from necessarily is a value add or a positive. Sometimes that makes people nervous. And I think there's value in putting your title aside and thinking in general about the value you bring. And I think thinking of it as you have an expanded sort of a toolbox and you get to bring diverse solutions and options. And we know that diversity on a larger scale increases all positive outcomes. So that's diversity of experience, diversity in thinking. And I think you got to play the game wherever you're at. If you want to affect change and you want to, and if that results in someone helping you climb a few rungs up the ladder so you can affect more change at differing levels, that's a bonus. So I think the EMBA just helps you play the game like an actual contender, and you have a toolkit. I would say judgment is one of the largest things I've gained from the program. I think I've always aspired to be that type of leader where you have strengths across all categories and across all elements. I sucked at a lot of technical proficiencies when I came into the program, and I still suck at them. There's people who can do finance and accounting circles around me, and that's always going to be the case. I think acknowledging your strengths and what you're looking to get out of the program, and acknowledging the things that you're better at or not better at, and then you can hire for those things, or you can entrust team members with those things. It certainly gave me a perspective on how to read some of those financial statements that I never had before. So I can't discount the value in learning about economics and all the things that I might not have thought I was strong at. But it's allowed me to exercise judgment in knowing when I should pursue something, when I need to seek help for doing something. So it's expanded my ability to deal with challenges and then to seize opportunities in the right way when they present themselves. I've mentioned my outlook has broadened. I feel like I have more capacity. I think there's something humbling about thinking of yourself a certain way and then realizing this class is the great equalizer. And I have colleagues that are very highly placed individuals at Coca-Cola or Lululemon, and they're calling me to ask for help on an assignment or understand something, and you're like, okay, I might have some value to put out in the world. And again, it's helped me think of myself in a certain way, and the people who need to notice, they've noticed. And I think the impact I'm having where I want to have it, it's delivered measurably in my surroundings.
Thank you. That's great to hear. One of the pieces of advice I've heard when joining the program, alumni say, like, drop the titles. If you're all in this together, you all are part of this class because you have unique perspectives and experiences to share with your peers and to enrich the learning of your peers. So to say, like, your classmates who by title seem really, they make you nervous or intimidating because of their roles, like, drop that at the door, because you all have so much to contribute and to add to the learning of each other. Shiv, what about you? Can you talk a little bit about the impact of the program thus far? You're in the home stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Matthew, you're going to shake your head and agree with me a lot here. On the political side, you probably recall the level of chaos and insanity you can deal with on the political side. You can feel like sometimes it just feels like an ongoing fire. One thing that I've really understood from the value from this program is my approach to problem solving has completely changed. And it's also, and I would say the critical part for it is that, like, I have a much more calm and rational approach. I would say legitimately after the first semester going into an election, I was able to actually recite or bring up parts of cases that we went through to actually calm the storm and use them as examples to talk to with my colleagues and explain why we should diagnose a problem A, B, and C versus just like running like chickens with our heads cut off. So the value has come in there. It's immense. Like I really can't put it into words how it's actually improved my ability to just diagnose and reorg things. And then to Matthew's point, as well as Paul's, my confidence, I think my confidence was high beforehand, but I feel like a little bit of it was imposter syndrome, where now it feels it's not cockiness, it's confidence. And I think it resonates with my colleagues because I'm very confident, but I'm also willing to go and talk to them and raise, what someone would consider a silly question and not be fearful of an answer. Because there really are no right answers. And I love that about the case-based method, because I realized when I was talking out my problems with an accountant or a health professional or somebody who's in the development world in real estate, that there really was no right answer. This is how they approach a situation, and this is how they would diagnose it. So it really refined my thought process. And I think that that's something that you don't really understand when you're going into the program. You just think you're going to learn an executive MBA and you're going to, become a lot more intelligent. No, your bandwidth's going to expand, but your awareness factor really grows incredibly. And I would say, and probably Paul and Matthew are going to agree with me, your ability to ask literally any question to the point where people aren't thinking that really comes in. And that opens up discussion and dialogue amongst your colleagues. So if you're talking about leadership, it really enhances leadership, but then enhances everybody else's to realize that they can play at a much higher level too.
That's such an interesting perspective or thought, to like how you're now approaching, like, open to asking all the questions, but also how you're understanding their responses. So thanks for sharing that. And what I've always found interesting, you're not the first person, and I think you all alluded to it or mentioned it head on, the confidence piece. I don't think a lot of like deeply people join the program who lack complete confidence, because I think you need to have a confidence in yourself to put your hand up to apply for the program and to show up in class the first day. I think like that's a shared sentiment, that there already is a confidence there, but the elevation of that confidence and the trust in yourself and the value you bring is a real add of the program. So I'm happy to hear that's been your experience. Now we're winding down, and I want to maybe end here by asking rapid fire. What is your biggest piece of advice? I know government is such a broad umbrella term, and you all played such critical roles in different arms of the government. But when you think of folks who would come to the research stage of the Executive MBA from a similar field who work in government, what would be your biggest piece of advice to them? Matthew, do you want to take that one away?
Yeah, this has been a very interesting discussion. It's amazing how much the three of us sort of have the same views in the program. But, I think if you find yourself in a government role, you're looking to take on, either additional leadership or you're thinking of how you want to sort of boost your career. The one thing the one thing I would encourage a person thinks about is what's the type of boost you're looking for, right? The Ivey program, I think we've all sort of alluded to it. There's an intensity to it. There's a differentiation to it, and how it supports the formation and kind of the rounding out of leaders that you really want to take a careful look at what's inside the machine and what comes out as the end result. If you're at this stage and you're taking a serious look at doing an MBA, that's the question. The challenge was put to me 6 years ago, and I certainly for others that I've talked to about doing it, it's a challenge I put to them. It's not just doing an MBA. It's what you're looking to gain, and it's what you're looking to do as you position yourself for that next step.
Thank you. Paul, what about you? What advice would you give?
I think, and Matthew said it, we all, instead of just building, I would just repeat exactly what Matthew said. I very much align with what he's saying. I think the perspective I'll add is if people are looking at this program, they're likely also thinking of an MPA, perhaps, depending on where they are in their government career. And I think what I would say is that think about, and again, building on what Matthew said, think about what you're looking to get out of it. I think, are you looking to expand career options? Are you looking for a private sector focus? Me particularly, I wanted to expand my outlook and worldview and then bring that into government. And again, I've said this before, if we're looking for innovation, it doesn't usually come in the traditional places, in the traditional ways. So to be exposed to what other sectors and industries are doing, and then to be able to use that in my toolkit was something of value to me for thinking about an MBA. And for anyone else who's thinking of what value that could possibly bring to government, I think the classes you take, strategy, economics, finance, marketing, management, leadership, politics, power, negotiation, all those things, for those of us who perform long-range planning and other public administration functions, you need to understand and engage with citizens and business stakeholders. And increasingly, this world is becoming more interconnected. It's becoming more interdependent. The value of co-designing things with the recipients of those policies and programs and services, it's no longer negotiable. So to understand how community thinks and citizens and private sector and business stakeholders, that leads, I think, to the best outcomes for government, because collectively we all represent who we're working for. When it comes to business planning, I think budgeting, innovation, I think all three of us will agree that most departments in government were under-resourced. We always have to be creative with budgets. So public sector, often we need those skills. We always want to offer more for less. And that if that's not the definition of innovation, to produce more for less time and less money, I don't know what is. And I think when we think about forward-thinking leadership and decision-making, you need to be informed. You need to know what's happening around you in the world. And a huge challenge I see in government is also breaking down silos. We have a very siloed sort of a culture in a lot of jurisdictions, whether provincially or nationally. And I think the whole function of the MBA is to be a generalist and to be able to weave all those patterns together. And if I can do that in government and connect those things holistically, I think there'll be benefits to government, the organization, and to all citizens as a whole. That's my large answer.
I love it. And I agree. So that's terrific, Paul. Thank you. Shiv, last but not least, what would your advice be?
So first, I would, again, I'm going to agree with both Matthew and Paul with everything they're saying, which has been consensus for this entire hour. But I would, just to expand on that, if you're considering doing this program, you have to think about what your why is, which I think we talk about through the program. That's one, for sure. You have to understand too that it won't thrust you into a leadership role, but you will end up in one as a result of this program because of how you enhance your abilities, and you will affect change. That is the big thing. The way you deal with your colleagues, the way you assist them, what you get out of them, you learn to get more out of people for little. To Paul's point, you're trying to maximize efficiency. You get that with your colleagues. So whatever you're going to do, you will affect direct change, especially in the government level. But you have to Matthew's point, you have to understand what your long game is going to be personally as well. So you can move up within the ranks, absolutely. But you also have to understand, why are you doing this, and where are you going, and where are you going with it? It is expanding of your toolbox. I'll see where this takes me, but I would say that it's a very exciting outlook, and whatever it is you decide to apply yourself to with the tools that are given in this program, you'll have a better understanding of how to get there.
That's awesome. One thing I'll say, you mentioned the tools that you're given. I think you've earned them. You've earned the tools in your toolbox, each of you. Thank you so much to each of you for being part of today's discussion and for sharing your insights and experiences for future executive MBAs to listen in on. I'm so grateful for your time and your insights, and hope you have a great afternoon. So thank you for joining us, and hopefully we can connect soon.